IVM.
There are famous stories of the 2013 World Cup being scheduled, the final hosted by India, being scheduled to play at the Wankhede. But that final was moved out of the Wankhede and moved to Brabon because Mumbai wanted to play a Ranji Trophy match. Sachin Tendulkar was playing. So they decided, yes, okay, fine, Women's World Cup, move them next door. And that tells you all you need to know about the disposition towards women's cricket. That entire 2013 Women's World Cup was such a lost opportunity. From what I remember writing, the Indian team did not play a single ODI for 200 days before that World Cup, which is just unbelievable if you talk about it right now.
One of the biggest ironies of Indian sport is women's cricket. For a sport that the entire country is mad about, the inconsistencies between the men's and the women's game are just astounding. BCCI brought the World Cup out of England for the first time to India in 1987. However, just a year after, in 1988, India could not even put together enough money to send the women's cricket team in time for the World Cup in Australia that year. In 2002, around the time when a shirtless Saurav was swinging his jersey over his head after the NatWest final, or in 2003 when Sachin almost won the World Cup in South Africa single-handedly, the women's state teams in Bombay and Kolkata were traveling for their games in unreserved compartments and sleeping in classrooms exactly around the same times. It continues even today, as we celebrate the success of the under-19 teams that go around the world for global exposure under Rahul Dravid. Not many are talking about the fact that there is no organized domestic circuit for girls under 19 in India. My guest Snehal Pradhan is a former Indian cricketer and is also someone who's been extremely vocal about this imbalance. She's currently a writer, a successful broadcaster, and is also a YouTube sensation with her channel Cricket with Snehal. As someone whose playing career matched the transition of women's cricket itself into the limelight, Snehal has had a ringside view to how the women's game has evolved in this country. I wanted to speak to her about her playing days as a girl from Pune and how things have changed for women's cricket in the last 2 decades. Welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast, Snehal. How are you doing?
I'm doing good as one can be in these kind of situations. I mean, there is a little bit of disappointment over the fact that the IPL has just been suspended. So I'm not as busy as I expected to be. And that is a little bit of a letdown because, I mean, despite the backdrop and everything, I was quite enjoying the IPL this year. But otherwise, lucky to be able to work from home and everyone at home is safe. So that's probably the definition of doing good nowadays.
Yeah, I think the RCB fans feel like there is a larger ploy here beyond the pandemic. But it has been a strange IPL for various reasons. We'll get to that in a bit. But you're mostly part of the Marathi commentary on TV, right? Where were you recording from? From Bombay?
From home. So we were recording from home. I'm based in Pune. So I was sitting in my office and had a backdrop provided and had all the tech provided. I'm going to be making a behind the scenes video of it. So that will give everyone an idea of how technology has just enabled amazing things in terms of commentary, and which is why I didn't have to be in the bubble. I was in a bubble before this when the South Africa women's team toured India. So most of the month of March was spent in a bubble because for that tournament I was on the ground doing commentary. That was in English, and the IPL has been in Marathi. Was in Marathi.
Right. That was a fantastic series, isn't it? The South Africa one.
Yeah.
Very memorable, I thought. But yeah, I think the thing about the way it ended is just the abruptness of it, isn't it? That just suddenly one day you're looking forward to it, and then by afternoon you know that not just today's game but the rest of the tournament is gone. Like that must have been more severe in your case, I presume.
It was very weird. The first day when the match got cancelled, we kind of got the information late. So the news had already broken on social media, etc. But our official communication came later. So we were all like, knowing that the match isn't going to happen, but waiting for the official communication to come through. And as soon as that match happened, and then there were a few positive cases in Delhi also. I knew that the any more matches over there can't happen because the teams are in contact with each other. So we had received our call time for the day. We had received our statistical previews, and then around 1:30 2 p.m. No, sorry, IPL suspended. So very weird. And in a sense, it was, as soon as that first case came out, you got the feeling that this is exactly what's going to happen. And in a sense, it was abrupt and sudden that I didn't honestly expect that first case to come out. I With so much riding on it and all the resources the BCCI has, I thought they could have pulled it off
Right.
in terms of the safety point of view. So it was sudden.
So we're recording this on the 6th of May, and I think what led to the calling off of the tournament will probably come to light in the coming weeks. But there are some theories doing the rounds. One is that it was the travel to different cities, and another is that maybe it was the Green Channel visit that some players did to the hospital to treat some of the injuries. What are you hearing?
Who knows? I mean, it's really speculation for anyone on the outside to have or to make a guess. It could be travel, considering that a few staff had contracted COVID on the way in while traveling. So obviously, travel, it does happen in travel, and the more you travel, the more likely it is to happen. Then there was that entire Green Channel hospital visit, and considering that the official information on COVID has just been updated, what, end of April or something, by the WHO on how various ways that COVID can spread. So the information is new, and the safety precautions were probably old, and that also could have been a factor. But beyond that, it's just you and me guessing.
That's true. Moving on to a part that doesn't need guessing. Snehal, I want to talk to you about your days growing up. What was childhood like, and how did you end up falling in love with the game of cricket?
I'm probably going to blame it on the fact that TV coverage of cricket just exploded in the 90s. And then, there's suddenly so much cricket on TV, and cricket is probably the only sport on TV. And as a kid, I played everything. As a kid, I was always outdoors. My parents actually tell stories of me swinging around a bat and the ball in my hand, as a toddler. So I was obviously picking up something from the outside, which is probably all these broadcasts, which were telling me that this looks like fun. And I was very lucky to have a lot of support as a kid, as a girl playing sport. To give you some background into the kind of progressive family that I was lucky to have, my grandmother in the 1950s got an MSc. She played multiple sports. She always was one of the big driving factors that you should do this, you should do that. Parents were fully supportive, things like going to pick me up and drop me off to various coaching classes that they enrolled me into as a kid, spending summer vacations on these camps organized by schools and things like that, where there's all sorts of outdoor activities happening, or
Was this all
spending.
in Pune?
Most of it is in Pune, or spending summer vacations with some relative or the other. Typically, my aunt, whose husband was in the Navy. So then we were in some naval residential colony and playing cricket with all the kids over there, or playing cricket with the boys in school. That's how I played all sports in school. I represented the school in badminton, table tennis. In college, I played basketball, handball, netball, all those kind of things. But cricket was the only one that I really took seriously. Cricket is the only one that I thought, okay, this seems really interesting, and this is the one sport that I want to do. So it was never a competition. In fact, a couple of people tried to encourage me to take up individual sports, considering that in team sports, your destiny is sometimes not in your hands. My uncle tried to wean me away from cricket and towards golf. Uh, there were a few people who were trying to recruit me into middle distance running teams at some point. But I mean, cricket was always the one, so to speak.
What about cricket?
I don't know. I've never thought about that before. And even thinking about it now, I can't put my finger on it. Just the fact that everybody was playing it is probably a feature of the environment in India rather than the sport itself. And the fact that, it looked cool playing. Because if I'm comparing to other sports that I played tennis, I played badminton, I played table tennis. The real difference is that those sports were not visible at that time. And I wasn't, watching those sports being played at a high level. Whereas I was watching cricket being played at a high level, even though it was men's cricket, but I didn't differentiate in my mind. So that could be it. I'm still not sure of that answer. It's not like, this game is any athletically different or in terms of what it demands or what it brings out. I mean, all sports have those basic qualities which bring out certain qualities in a person and develop certain qualities. So I'm not sure, but
Right.
I think it's just the fact that it was everywhere.
Later on in life, you will, of course, become a fast bowler and bowl alongside Julian Goswami and others. But as a girl, did you always want to be a bowler?
No, I wanted to be a wicket keeper the first time I turned up to
Really?
Maharashtra team practice. Yeah, so I never knew that girls played cricket. Luckily, my grandmother used to live in the same housing society where Shubhangi Kulkarni stayed, and she knew Shubhangi Kulkarni at the time as a former India captain. So she tracked Shubhangi Kulkarni down and asked her where these girls practice. She sent me there with one of my aunts. Go and ask her, and she gave me, go to Nehru Stadium in Pune. That's where the Maharashtra team practices. So as a 14-15 year old, I'm suddenly turning up to practice with the state team girls, the state senior team girls. And I wanted to be a wicketkeeper. I have no idea why. Maybe Adam Gilchrist. But as soon as, I walked in, and I'm one of the tallest people there, even at as a teenager, because I'm like 5'11. I've been 5'11 since I was a teenager. So the people there said, nothing doing, go bowl fast.
Right. You just spoke about playing for the state, but did you play any organized cricket before that?
I played for the state before I played for my school or before I played a local game.
Wow.
Because there were no organized local cricket games for girls, right?
Right.
It was in school, I was practicing with the boys, but I could practice with them, but I couldn't play in the inter-school competitions. That never, occurred to us as a possibility because we didn't have a girls' team. And suddenly I was playing under 16 state, I was playing under 19 state, I was playing senior state before I had played really any organized cricket. So that was essentially my first round of match experience was with the state girls team. And that is the state of women's cricket in India. And in many ways, not a lot has changed. So I would practice with the boys. I would play with the boys informally. I would practice formally with the boys. I had like my parents had gotten me enrolled in a cricket academy and whatnot. Where the first time I went to one, the coach asked me to hide my ponytail under my hat because he didn't want it to be seen that a girl is on the ground and he's teaching a girl. But my first match experience really was with the state team girls and the matches that they were playing, and then they were traveling for matches now and then. But that is one of the very large differences between organized men's cricket and women's cricket.
What was it like playing with the boys in school?
In school with the boys was completely fine because everyone knew me as, the girl who played sports. So she's always going to be on the sports field, and playing school with the boys was really no different to any of the boys playing cricket with the boys. At least that's how I remember it. I'm not sure how the boys felt. I'm sure they felt odd, but I really didn't care much because I had known most of them for most of my school years as well. The interesting part was that even under the state team, we didn't have any formal coaching. We didn't have any formal coaches. This is a reminder, pre BCCI days. So pre 2005, 2006, women's cricket was run by a Women's Cricket Association of India. And that is the pioneer body that started women's cricket in the 70s, which is, a period where a lot of women have put in a lot of work to grow the game, but there is no money in the game whatsoever. So therefore, there are no formal coaches teaching us. There were two India players in the Maharashtra setup who were currently or had recently played for India. So they were our de facto coaches. And once in a while, a former player would come and would be involved in coaching, but there was no formal coaching program. It was just go practice with the girls, learn whatever you can from the senior girls. And that's how I got my grounding in cricket. So it was a very informal time where we would roll our own pitches, we would put up our own nets, we would contribute on our own for any kind of material that we needed. And that was just how it was. And no one really questioned as to why it is like this, or should it be different? Do other people have different experiences? I don't know. That was just how we started, and it was very much a go along with it and don't really ask a lot of questions kind of a situation.
So you're talking about like the late 90s, early 2000s?
Early 2000s.
Early 2000s.
2001 is when I started playing with the state girls.
And as early 2000s, that's how the state of women's cricket was. Before we go into that in a bit, because you've been one of the biggest voices of equality as far as cricket goes, I want to talk to you about, so then growing up as a player, where were you learning from? Like if there's no formal coaching, even at a state level, how were you honing your craft?
This concept of honing craft and all is a very recent concept for me. It was just essentially go, play, improve what you can. The more you play, the more you improve. The concepts of, that you should have a coach, that you should have week by week progress, that you should have some way to measure your progress. These are all very nebulous concepts when I'm playing as an early teenager or as a late teenager with the state teams. But some of the biggest influences in terms of how I learned cricket was one of these India players within the Maharashtra team. Her name is Amrita Shinde, and she's been involved with cricket for a long time. She was a national selector a while back, and she was the captain of the team after 2006 onwards. And she was one of the biggest influences in how I approached the game and how I started thinking about the game differently, because she having played for India in the early 2000s, having traveled to places like South Africa or England for cricket, she had seen a higher level of cricket, and she was basically passing that knowledge down to the next generation. And I was one of the people who was really keen on absorbing it. But that happened in 2006. So pre 2006, because there were two main teams on the domestic circuit which provided employment, Railways and Air India, all the talent went there. So including all our senior players, they were all playing for these Railways and Air India in the domestic competition. So we were basically a bunch of 19, 20-year-olds who were being led by one senior person who was our state team captain. And there was no formal coaching and no real growth, obviously, because, what do we know about how you should be progressing over the years and how you should be learning different variations and how you should be improving your fitness and all. It's only after 2006 what happened is the Air India team got disbanded because according to the BCCI framework, they didn't fit into the framework. Railways, being an existing team within the BCCI framework, they continued. So all the Air India talent returned to their respective states. And therefore, Amrita Shinde, along with a couple of other Air India seniors, Maharashtra seniors who were playing for Air India, returned to the state. And then they brought a lot of knowledge back. And that was when the not official, but the informal skill development and the informal growth as a player, introduction to new fitness techniques, the importance of fitness, role clarity, all these things started coming into our game because of what the knowledge that these senior players were bringing back. And that then really changed things around, because A, the value of the senior players themselves, and B, the fact that they were passing all this knowledge down to us made Maharashtra one of the strongest teams in the domestic tournament. We made the next 3 or 4 finals back to back. So that was the stage where the graph really went up. And still at that stage, I will say that there wasn't formal coaching happening, because you have to understand at that point, no one is really thinking about cricket as a career. It's just something that you want to do, because until 2005, 2006, there's no money in the game. If you play for India, you'll get paid something like 10,000 rupees per tour, which was something, at least we were getting paid at that point. Domestic cricket, there was no money at all, not getting paid at all to play domestic cricket. So why will a kid see potential? Why will her parents see potential and say, okay, I think you should be having a personal coach and a personal trainer, or I think you should have a personal coach who looks after your game and is responsible for your skill development. So that concept itself, in my head at least, in my experience, did not exist. We were just playing for fun and something we like to do, but very possibly we may not do this forever.
So all of you playing the game at the state level up until now are playing it purely for the love of the game and virtually nothing else.
Absolutely. And I mean, everyone has a theory. All us people who have played in that era, and now we see the kids nowadays and how easy they're getting it. I put that in air quotes because every probably faded generation says that, but it's logical to think that that kind of condition self-selects for only the most crazy people, and therefore a lot of good quality cricketers were in the system. A lot of people who cared about the game were in the system, but it was purely out of passion and wanting to play cricket. There was no other incentive. I mean, you could strive towards a railway job, but that is such a unknown incentive. I only found out about the details of a railway job very late in my playing career. So it's not a reason why someone starts or someone stays in the game.
Right. And the fact that we produce talent like you and Julian, who you played alongside with, all of that, is just amazing, isn't it? There's
Mentioning
any of the
mentioning my talent and Juludi's talent in the same breath is probably not a fair justice to her talent. But I mean, she's been amazing. Like, to think that she was one of the reasons that I really took cricket seriously, and watching her play on TV in her debut series. And to think that now I'm retired, I've played for 15 years, I had enough, I retired, I moved on, and she's still playing and she's still so good, is just it's an incredible talent and everything.
Where did you first watch her, and how did you get to know her, and how much of an inspiration has it been for you?
So this was 2002, her debut series. That series had been arranged on Doordarshan, so Doordarshan was showing those games, and she was playing against England, and already had this reputation on the domestic circuit as this supremely fast bowler. And you could see that even for the international level, she was a raw talent, and she was knocking people's stumps back and all. So I was like, oh, wow, it would be so cool if I could open the bowling with her for India. And that's when that dream really took concrete shape. And in that series itself, again, Amrita Shinde, my mentor who was with the state team, she was playing in that series. That series came for the final match in Pune. So there was no restrictions back then. So I was, practically hanging out on the edge of the dressing room for the entire game. After the game, Amrita Dai called me in. She introduced me to the coach, the captain. She introduced me to Julan. Everyone had a nice laugh because we were standing shoulder to shoulder, both of us, these exceptionally tall women. And that was the first real interaction with her. And Juludi has been an amazing guide all throughout. She's been an amazing friend all throughout. And she's that kind of a person who is welcoming and warm by nature. Also slightly hot-tempered on the field, but having known her off the field, you know that she's saying whatever she says with best interests at heart. Yeah, and it's been amazing to kind of play alongside her and now watch her and be a part of chronicling her story.
You spoke about Julian, and everybody who follows the game knows that cricket is unfairly cruel to the body of a fast bowler. With virtually no real coaching or guidance in terms of fitness or recovery, how did you guys manage to keep going for as long as you did? Talk to us about the physical demands of the game and how you coped with them.
The physical parts of it was always a factor, and the physical threats, or the fact that you have to always deal with injury, is always a factor. Like, there was a back injury for me that kept cropping up from time to time, and that had to be dealt with, that had to be managed, that had to be prevented. So every body tends to respond differently. I was one of the people who was called the Rahul Dravid of women's cricket because I sweat so much. So taking care of your body in that respect, figuring out what kind of hydration schedule works, what kind of hydration schedule prevents injuries, establishing a link between injuries and things like hydration, things like recovery. Those were all parts of the process. And they were parts that you kind of accepted that this is something that you have to deal with and learn. And I don't think that's changed even now, considering that the workloads also have gone up and the amount of cricket played has gone up, not in this last year, but until then. So yeah, as a fast bowler, you do have to deal with injuries. That is a little bit of an inevitability, but the support system to deal with those is something that is much better now. Even towards the second half of my career, we had a lot of support from the NCA, and we had a few good physios around us. Even with our team at Western Railway, we were one of the more forward-thinking teams, and the team had a physiotherapist with us whenever we went on tournaments, which was a pretty good move. So those kind of things really helped, because I remember that particular tournament where I had that back injury during a railway tournament. The fact that we had a physio that year with us was a big plus, and it really helped me stay in good shape throughout that tournament.
So in 2008, you make your debut for the Indian national team. How did that feel?
At the time, it was amazing, of course. At the time, the euphoria of the situation, or the fact that, everything is so new. You're traveling abroad for the first time for cricket. You're suddenly being paid ridiculous amounts of money for winning a tournament that you're expected to win. I'm talking about the Asia Cup in 2008, which was my debut tournament. Yes. And suddenly, once we won that tournament, BCCI announces a huge cash prize. I'm like, ye kya ho raha hai? So there was that entire newness of the entire
ridiculous amounts of money from a women's cricket perspective.
From a women's cricket point of view. So, I mean, we got a cash award of 5 lakh each. Just significant amount of money, yes, for women's cricketers in the late 2000s. But again, let's not compare with men's cricket amounts. And we shouldn't also. That's also something I believe in. But looking back now, I realize how unprofessional the entire approach was. I remember how unprofessional even my approach was. At that point, I was kind of playing cricket semi-professionally. I had landed a sports quota job with Western Railway. But if I had a chance to go back with what I know now of how a professional cricketer should be, what kind of approach they should have to the game, how they should be investing in their own game, there is so many things I would love to teach the 2008 version of me. Because once you get to the Indian team, you realize also, along with that euphoria, that the other teams are just so much better in terms of the finances they're getting, in terms of the support that they're getting from their home board. I'm talking about the Englands, the Australias, the New Zealands, which were our main competition. And they are like a couple of levels ahead right now in terms of their structures, in terms of their frameworks and support systems. So you realize that you have to, or I should have realized that you have to work ridiculously hard to really do something different and beat them. But I kind of got caught in that, take a railway job environment where you have to keep your your railway side of things also happy, and try and keep the cricket side of things also happy. And in hindsight, you're not going to become a great cricketer if you try and keep both those kind of things balanced. You have to really knuckle down and focus on the professional training side of things if you want to do. So thinking back, it was, a great experience to play for India. But knowing what I know now, I would love to do it all again. But what I think about doing right now is providing this kind of opportunity and this kind of structure to the next generation, or really calling it out if they don't have them, and passing on whatever I can.
Right. But just to go a little bit deeper, what would you have done differently if you had to do it again?
I would have firstly employed a physical fitness coach and a personal coach, two things which I did not have through most of my career. It was still in the form of the ad hoc kind of coaching that you're receiving from people who know about the game, or the coaching that you're receiving from the various camps that you attend. And I would have really changed the setting of my priorities, rather than, if I just landed a railway job and the next year I played for India. So rather than try and keep one side in the railway side happy and try and fulfill my commitments there as well, I would have just said, chuck it. Even if I have to take leave for the entire year, I'll do it because I'm playing for the country and I would like to train professionally rather than semi-professionally, because the rest of the world is training professionally.
Right. After that, after your debut series, did coaching and what we were talking about, honing the craft, etc. Did that get any better at any point?
It did, because under the BCCI system, we started getting access to the NCA. There was a good and a bad there again. At the time, the NCA was stuck in a loop of not just for women's cricket, but even for men's cricket of, how things should be taught in a very formulaic way. And that was, in hindsight, everyone in the cricket community believes that was bad method. And therefore, despite getting good facilities, good access to people who are high level coaches, the entire ecosystem was in a bit of a funk at that point, the coaching philosophies at that point. So it did. We got more matches because we were suddenly playing at the NCA level also. We were pooled into zonal cricket academies. So we would put in 1 month camps in the summer where we got to spend a lot of time on these skills, and we did improve. We got access to higher quality coaches who I learned a lot from. And so all those things did improve, but they improved in a very haphazard way based on or dependent on the interest that the respective state association took in women's cricket. So some state associations really paid attention to the women's cricket and their teams clearly progressed. Some state associations had 1 or 2 passionate people, but no support from the organizers. Some had good organization support, but some missing link in terms of the coaching of the playing group. So overall things improved, but it was still very haphazard as to how the skills were developing.
What are some of the state associations who've always, probably in your opinion, taken this seriously and done a relatively better job?
I actually did like a survey, an informal survey of this, and some of the names that keep cropping up are Mumbai, Baroda have done fairly well, Madhya Pradesh have been doing well recently, Bengal have always done a very good job, and their results are showing. They're one of the few teams who have beaten the champions Railways. Railways, of course, do get by default here because they're the one team that provides employment. They're the only company that provides employment to the entire women's cricket ecosystem, which is again a problem and a good thing. So the Railways has always been the top team. I think roughly out of 15 competitions that have happened so far, they would have won 13. Every year they'll just keep on winning. So these are probably some of the states which are most supportive. Kerala has been doing pretty well. Karnataka have invested. Andhra is one of the big success stories in women's cricket. These are probably some of the top states.
Among other things, Snehal, I think one of the important things that happened in your career, along with all the other highs, was also when your action was called. I think, if I'm not wrong, 2011, probably in Derby. How much of it would you attribute to the lack of a structured, coaching, etc., that happened prior to that?
I would attribute a fair amount of it to the lack of this structured coaching and the lack of. So I definitely hold myself responsible for not putting that kind of a coaching framework for myself into place. But also something like this should have been addressed by the coaching framework within the country, considering that, we were at the NCA and all. And it's something that the coaches there also did touch on, that when you were here, they said when we were reviewing my action after it was called, we were comparing it to then videos of 6 months ago when I was in the NCA, and we were all going and observing how something's changed in that interim. The bowling action isn't the same as what it was previously. So this kind of thing should have essentially been spotted at an earlier stage and probably addressed in a more long-term way. I mean, recently, right now, I got the chance to do a coaching course through the NCA, and learning again what I know now, I could have suggested, 5, 6 different ways for this kind of a problem to be addressed before it became a problem. And it had come up in domestic cricket also. There were warnings from umpires, etc., on the domestic circuit from time to time. So it was something that crept into my action when certain technical and physical flaws and deficiencies came in. So the lack of a coaching structure and a coaching team on my part definitely contributed. But also, if there were coaches back then who were in positions to kind of do things, I would really have preferred if those things had been done preventively rather than trying to fix the problem later.
At this point, I want to move away from your own career briefly and spend some time on women's cricket administration in India. We spoke about WCAI before 2005. While there seems to have been a lot of champions for this organization, what was the economics like for a game that certainly had no money in it? Who was funding the WCI?
So there are stories dating back from the 70s and 80s of how the pioneer batch of women basically raised their own funds, of how some of the people in charge used some of their personal finances to help finance the game. There is that kind of a situation. To be honest, I'm not sure about the details of the financials. Those weren't questions that I was asking back then. But I do know that the WCI used to receive some funding from the government. So it was kind of recognized by the government as the official administrator of women's cricket in India. And above and beyond that, they try to bring in some kind of sponsors, or very often it was sponsorship offered or support offered on a quid pro quo basis. That, for example, leading up to the 2005 World Cup, Shivangi Kulkarni wanted the Indian team to train at good facilities. So she basically networked with Infosys Mysore, who had a lovely facility for all their IT staff, with a cricket ground, a gym, and good accommodation and whatnot. And Infosys Mysore were kind enough to support by providing those facilities and those accommodations, etc. And I don't think they were officially sponsoring the team. They weren't paying any money, but the fact that they were getting those kind of facilities then improved the performance of the players. There was one series in between where ASMI came on as sponsors of the Indian team. There was later a sponsorship by Sahara. So it was very haphazard. It was very up to the determination and the resourcefulness of the person in charge. And there have been periods where the person in charge is just absolutely don't care about women's cricket, and therefore the game has declined to the point of the Indian team not being able to travel for a World Cup. So there's all sorts of stories in how the game was financed before that. But I suppose a basic amount would have been coming from the government, but if you really wanted to do something meaningful, you had to try and bring in some kind of sponsors from outside.
Which year was this when you said the Indian team was not able to travel for the World Cup?
Probably 1988. Where there was one person from J&K who was in charge of women's cricket in India, and some politically motivated person. A lot of the organizers and heads of administration were politically motivated right from the 80s. But this person, I don't know. I mean, history says that was the worst period in terms of hardly playing any matches at the international level. And then due to an administrative mix-up, not sending the team for the 1988 World Cup, or sending the entry too late. By the time the organizers in Australia received the entry, they're like, no, sorry, we've already made all the arrangements, you can't participate, because of some political infighting between this person and the Ministry of External Affairs or the Ministry of Sports, something like that. So the details are probably documented better in my friends and colleagues Siddhant and Karunya's book, The Fire Burns Blue, a book on history of women's cricket in India. This is my vague recollection of it, but this is definitely what happened.
And that is stunning, right? If I'm not wrong, isn't it true that the Women's World Cup, the one-day World Cup, actually happened before the Men's World Cup in 73, isn't it? If I'm not wrong. Is that correct?
Yes. And it's very likely that the Men's World Cup, the idea for a Men's World Cup came from the Women's World Cup.
Yes. Yeah.
So there was Rachel Hayhoe Flint and one very wealthy sponsor in England, I forget his name. They basically said, if we have an opportunity, let's hold a World Cup. And they were visionary enough to pull it off. And Then 1975, the men, okay, let's do the same.
If you were to talk about women's cricket itself, purely from an India perspective, I think it is fair to say that there were three different eras. One probably from the 70s to until 2005 when WCI was running the show. And then from 2005 when BCCI took over till say 2015. I say 2015 because that is when the Big Bash League had parallel women's teams for the same men's franchises. And I'm assuming that was a big deal. And then the third era being the post 2015 era, which of course saw India coming really close to winning the World Cup in 2017. And now when the Women's T20 Challenge is actually a reality. How do you see this progression, and especially in the period post 2005 after the BCCI took over? Did you necessarily see things get better for women's cricket?
It was both. It was better and at the same time it was worse. Because like I said, facilities improved, payments came in. So if you're talking about incentives of why a girl should be playing cricket, why she should take up the sport, those were starting to appear. Payments at the national level for playing for India suddenly became significant, or at least more significant than they were before. Of course, nothing compared to what the Indian men's team was being paid, but it became a viable option, a viable career option. If you think you're good enough to play for the country, you can earn money. May not be a lot of money, but that was the general situation. But again, in terms of apathy, in terms of how much attention the women's game got, it did suffer in phases. It tended to depend very heavily on the attitudes of the people in charge. So Sharad Pawar was the BCCI president or secretary or something like that when the merger happened or when the takeover happened. And because of his dynamic with Shubhangi Kulkarni, there was a lot of momentum around that entire phase. So in the next 2-3 years, women's cricket was looked after fairly well. The next couple of administrations were not so kind to women's cricket. There are famous stories of the 2013 World Cup being scheduled, the final, hosted by India, being scheduled to play at the Wankhede, but that final was moved out of the Wankhede and moved to Brabon because Mumbai wanted to play a Ranji Trophy match. Sachin Tendulkar was playing, so they decided, yes, okay, fine, Women's World Cup, move them next door, and that tells you all you need to know about the disposition towards women's cricket. That entire 2013 Women's World Cup was such a lost opportunity. From what I remember writing, the Indian team did not play a single ODI for 200 days before that World Cup, which is just unbelievable if you talk about it right now. So if you look at the number of matches that the Indian team played, they played more matches in that 2000 to 2005 World Cup cycle under the WCAI than they did in each of the next 2 World Cup cycles under the BCCI. And that gives you a pretty good idea of women's cricket being sidelined or, being seen as something that has to be done. So it is done to the bare minimum degree of involvement. And that was a reality in some of those BCCI years.
Shocking, isn't it? If it had happened in any other country, I'm just thinking it would have been a huge, huge scandal. But moving on, what was the domestic circuit like pre-2005? And did it change after the BCCI took over?
I did a piece on this when I was still in my playing days, and there were a bunch of big changes. Pre-2005, there was no money on the domestic circuit, but there were a fair amount of matches. Shubhangi Kulkarni, who I mentioned, she became secretary of the association around 2002, 2003 sometime. And she was probably one of the most active, one of the most proactive, one of the most concerned people in the ecosystem as to how the Indian team can grow, and organized a lot of matches both internationally and domestically, organized fitness camps for the national team, etc., etc. But under her, the system was basically an under 16 tournament, an under 19 tournament, and a senior tournament. She added an under 19 interzonal tournament. There was already a senior interzonal tournament. So the under 16 level would happen 25 over matches. For the under 19 level, we'd play 40 over matches, and the senior level, we'd play 50 over matches. And those were the 3 main tournaments that happened during the year. So there was not a lot of cricket, but it improved and increased under her. Post 2005-6, when the BCCI took over, suddenly there was an improvement in facilities, there was an improvement in grounds, there was an improvement in umpiring, in travel, because before that we were traveling very often unreserved long distances. Tournaments get announced last minute, you have to rush, go try and book a train. It's near impossible to book a train for 15 people plus their luggage, so we get 6-7 seats, everyone has to cram, rotate on that. Then you go to a tournament, land up half dead from the travel, and then you have to play the next day, that kind of a situation. On terrible grounds, sometimes with everyone sleeping in one classroom, sometimes multiple teams sharing a dormitory. Whereas after 2006, that changed to 3-star hotels, twin sharing a room, you getting an allowance to play matches, even domestic matches. But at the same time, in those last few years of WCI, you could sense that WCI was the sole focus of the people in charge, and they were putting a lot of effort into it, and that effort was being seen. The Indian team had just for the first time reached the final of the Women's World Cup in 2005. They went to England and they beat England in a test series in 2006. So, but after 2005-6, women's cricket became a side project that didn't get the attention it deserved, and very often was done because it had to be done. The ICC had mandated that all boards have to take over both men's and women's cricket, and India was the last board to take over cricket within the top 8 teams. So they were reluctant to start off with, and that became a theme over the next World Cup cycle, that there wasn't as much tournaments happening. The under 16 nationals were discontinued and have remained to be discontinued until this day. Still, we produce people like Smriti Mandhana and Deepti Sharma who debut at age 17. So don't tell me the talent isn't there, but that's a different story. I'll send you the link to this piece also that I did, which explains it in detail at the time, which will give you a very clear picture of things before and after.
Okay. Now, we spoke about this from a purely Indian context up until now. Are things very different globally? Especially in countries like Australia and England, and especially since 2000. What is the big difference between how we are looking at women's cricket and how they are?
So I'll point out a couple of differences. One is essentially the stages at which professionalization happened. England were the first country to really introduce any kind of professional structure for their team. In 2008 or something, they introduced semi-professional contract structure where you basically are signed up as an ambassador with a charity, and you go to schools and you inspire girls, give talks, conduct coaching sessions, and that's the only job. You have to do a set number of appearances a year, and the rest of the time you can basically take off to play cricket. That's what you were paid to do. That was their first iteration of professionalism. Then immediately, because of that professionalism, they won the next 2 World Cups. They won 2009 ODI and T20 World Cups. Australia immediately saw, oh my God, they're winning, and they went professional as well. They started with a smaller degree of professionalism than they are at right now, but they basically introduced central contracts with their team, and they went professional. They won the next 5 World Cups. Literally. I mean, 2010, 2012, 2013, 2014, only in 2016 did they lose. So for the next 4-5 years, Australia dominated the circuit. India only got professional contracts in 2015. Again, I think the last subcontinental team, or the last team in the top 8 to really move towards professionalism. Pakistan had moved towards professionalism before us. And immediately the results came. 2015, we turned professional, and 2017 got to the final of the World Cup, came within winning distance of that World Cup. So the economics are obvious. Invest in your teams and you will get the results. The fact that other countries saw that opportunity before us basically gave them a head start, and now they've consolidated on those head starts by taking various levels of professionalism down to their domestic cricket. So Australia, their domestic circuit is completely professional thanks to both their state teams and the WBBL. If you put those two together, they earn enough money to train the year round on cricket. Even at the state level. So that's a crazy base and depth that they're building. England recently have made 40 of their players contracted to 8 regional teams. So they have introduced a massive level of professionalism at their domestic cricket. New Zealand are only just catching up. They only went fully professional in the last 3 years or so for their national team, and over the last year have started investing in domestic cricket because they're also seeing that they're falling behind. India have still not made our domestic cricket professional. We have a pool of 15 to 20 players at the top level who are contracted by the board and they are professionally paid.
Right. We're speaking about the economics of the game, and no better segue than this to talk about IPL for women. That is a topic that you've been extremely vociferous. But before we go into that, in one of your articles, you had talked about almost a structured survey you had done with over 350 domestic women players, and you had co-authored a report about it. Right? What were some of the key insights from that?
Yeah, so that report was called the Equal Hue Report, and it was a way of documenting a lot of things that we already knew and also finding out a lot of things that we didn't know. And when I say we, I mean three of us were in the media box. 3 Indian media persons were in the media box in 2017. We were the only 3 who had traveled from India to cover that World Cup. So the 3 of us were there at Lord's when India lost that final, and we carried the pain of that loss back. And myself and a colleague, Siddhant Patnaik, we decided let's put something on paper and try and do something about it. That idea reached the Sports Law and Policy Center, who basically commissioned it formally and said, why don't you make it a more expansive, more exhaustive report on women's cricket in India? There's never been something like that. So that's how we got to the project. Karunya Keshav also came in. The 3 of us co-authored that report. The bedrock of the report was a survey based on feedback from 350 current state level cricketers. So one of the big takeaways from that was a lot of the girls said they had hardly ever played girls cricket in school. They had hardly ever played in all girls teams in school. They had hardly ever played in all girls teams in college. Only about 50% of them had played all girls teams at the college or university level. And even maybe only 30% or 20% had played in all girls teams in schools. So school cricket is obviously one of the big holes in the Indian grassroots ecosystem. Under 16 was also something that most of the girls said that they wanted to play, and therefore there is a strong push there is a demand from the players' side that they want to play that. Test cricket is something they said they would like to play. They would like to see India playing, and it's very good that India are going to be playing a test when they go to England right now. One big thing was that a lot of girls said that financial barriers were a very real barrier to start playing cricket, which intuitively you and I know because a bat is so costly as compared to just buying a football. Another thing is that a lot of girls said that at some level in their extended family, their neighbors, their society, they receive discouragement from playing cricket, saying that cricket is not a game for girls. Cricket is something that the boys do. You will get dark in the sun if you play. Who will marry you? All sorts of things. So those are some of the stark findings. And then we put all of those findings together with our own experience, having covered the game and for me, having played the game, into that report, intending it to be a foundational document of analyzing where we are, therefore we can build ahead. And B, if any stakeholders want to get involved in women's cricket, they know now through this report what the ground realities are, where they can intervene and maybe make the most difference, whether those are internal stakeholders like the BCCI or external stakeholders like any private company who wants to just say fill a gap.
Right. And you had written, recently at the, citing the kind of insights that you took from this report about what is happening with the women's T20 challenge. I think your article was titled as "Remember the Name." It's the women's T20 challenge, where the larger point was that it is not the women's IPL, right? And we seem to be deliberating on this like as though it's something as complex as sending someone to the Mars. We're saying that this will be 3 teams, which will become 4 teams, and then eventually, we will do A, B, C things before it becomes an actual IPL. While we know that it really works from what has been happening in the Big Bash League, where just for those who are uninitiated, it's the same teams that play the men's and the women's league. Okay. What are your thoughts on on why this is taking so long?
There is no reason for this not to have happened as early as 2018 after that 2017 World Cup, other than the fact that, there is a lack of will for this to get done. And there is a lack of importance. There is a lack of awareness about how important it is for the game holistically, and also how important it is or how valuable it is as a revenue generating property. So I'm not just talking about, doing the right thing because it is the right thing to do. It is also the economically smart thing to do, to have a women's tournament, which we saw last year when the IPL was in Dubai. The Women's T20 Challenge was conducted there. All the sponsors who were covering the men's IPL or sponsoring the men's IPL also paid extra money to the BCCI for the women's IPL. So you can generate revenue from a property, even a property as small as 3 teams with no meaningful connections to the fans, besides the fact that, they have made up names and their favorite player is playing in them. But imagine then multiply that by more teams. Imagine that and multiply that by the fact that you have maybe a Smriti Mandhana playing for Mumbai Indians. Maybe you have a Punjab Kings having Punjab Queens with Harmanpreet Kaur as their captain. Imagine Jhulan Goswami for Kolkata, and the fan connection potential. And I refuse to believe that this is not an economically viable idea. It's already proven to be economically viable. The fact that you had sponsors, and the BCCI treasurer himself said that it's a self-sustaining model. So it's paying, all the costs are covered at the very least. So the common sense thing to do is to expand it, is to build on it, is to profit from it. Go make the money. I don't mind, as long as this kind of a women's IPL happens, because then the potential for societal change through a tournament like this, a high visibility tournament, just like I was inspired to play cricket because there was so much women's cricket happening. Just think the reach of a tournament like this and the impact on the elite sport and domestic sport, where you have your Shafali Verma's opening the batting with the Danny Wyatt, and now the rest is literally history. What more of a success story do you want? And I've been banging my head on multiple walls for a while now.
And do you see things? I mean, in between, I was when you spoke about Punjab Kings and Queens, I was reminded of this article you had written in response to Cricinfo's decision to use gender-neutral terms like batter as against a batsman as an overall practice, right? And I think you've written a lot about it. I was reminded of that. But are things on the cusp of changing a lot? Because even this year, we were going to stick to the 3-team format and not even add the 4th team for whatever reason it is. How do you see the next 5 years for women's Premier League in India?
I wish I could say I was optimistic, but the last couple of years have shown us that this property is not growing, even though you have a proof of concept in 2019, where this Women's T20 Challenge was held in Jaipur, and for the final you had sold out stands, and the TV numbers broke all previous records by significant margins. So the fact that you have all that success should tell you common sense that the next year things should grow, but they have not grown. Okay, 2020 pandemic ho gaya, whatnot. 2021 it should have grown to 4 teams. It did not. Now nothing is happening as it happens that the IPL itself is suspended. Women's T20 Challenge isn't going to be happening. And I would say the Women's T20 Challenge, or the women's game, is the biggest casualty of the IPL. Even besides the fact that so many players are who are involved in it are not going to get involved in it, men's players. But for the potential growth of the women's game is suffering more in this pandemic. I mean, it's just so obvious that, it took a year for international cricket to resume, for the Indian women's cricket team to be back on the field, whereas the men's team were back in a matter of months. And I cannot believe that it is just a question of economics. I cannot believe that it's just a question of, not having the depth in domestic cricket. I watched domestic cricket. I know there is definitely enough depth to add a 4th team. And if you have 4 teams, Why not align those 4 teams to 4 existing teams? Ask the 8 franchisees or soon to be 10 franchisees. Would 4 of you be interested in coming up? If no one says yes, fine, get new teams. As long as we have something very concrete for these women to play, not an exhibition tournament. And this is what is happening right now, is simply an exhibition tournament. And they deserve better.
Yeah. And they keep positioning it as an experiment, quote unquote, right? Every time this happens, like as though something is left to be proven from a viability perspective. And, interestingly, it's not just cricket, isn't it? Like the same thing happened with Kabaddi. There was an exhibition piece that was done, which actually had a lot of interest generated, but then over a period of time, it didn't really take off. Right? Do you feel the pandemic and probably the emphasis that we now put more on just the content of it, and not necessarily worrying about the revenue collected gates, etc., for that matter, could probably push it could hasten things?
No, the pandemic has slowed down things. That is the harsh reality. I mean, in terms of how much cricket was played by the men, as soon as the IPL finished September, October, they went to Australia and they've been playing nonstop ever since. By the women, there was an opportunity to send the women's team to England. England had already proven that they could conduct a tournament safely within a bio bubble. There was an opportunity as early as August, September last year, but the BCCI did not send the women's team, so the pandemic slowed that one tour down. IPL T20 challenge was supposed to happen because of pandemic. It's not going to happen this year. What further fixtures for the Indian team will again be affected, for the Indian women's team will be affected by the second wave, remain to be seen. The pandemic has unfortunately slowed down women's cricket. The revolution has stalled, as a line in a book that I was reading recently says. And whatever momentum had been building up, because if you look at it, since 2017, the Indian women's team reached 2 out of 3 finals of ICC tournaments and reached the semi-final of the third one. So the momentum that was building over those 3 years since the 2017 World Cup, the Shafali Verma phenomenon, which helped India to reach the final of the T20 World Cup in front of 86,000 people, 86,174, I'm going to say that number. And that momentum, unfortunately, has been completely lost, with the pandemic sometimes being the reason and sometimes being a convenient excuse.
Right. As you talk about keeping momentum, I see all sport as mythology, right? And that's what sport has always been in whatever the sport is. And the people who write these stories, of course, there are television highlights which are forever captured on YouTube, etc. But the real community who write the mythology are journalists and others, right? Who tell the stories. Right? How has, in your experience, both in the playing times as well as now, you're part of the broadcasting fraternity, how has journalism supported women's cricket in India?
So after my playing career, and I retired early because I knew I wasn't going to stay in the railways if I wasn't playing cricket, and I needed time to establish myself in whatever second career I chose. After that, I chose to get into media. I chose to write articles about the sport because there wasn't enough being done pre-2017. Even the most basic match coverage wasn't happening. It was only once 2017 happened and suddenly this women's team of ours captured imaginations. It was the same women's team playing for the previous 2 years, but before that, not a lot of people cared. But I tried to cover as much as possible. I tried to write as much as possible. I tried to increase their presence as much as possible. But post 2017, all the basics are done. All the basics are covered. Now, because they are an object of interest, so to speak, the team is loved by so many people and so many followers on social media, etc. The basic reporting is covered. And therefore, I see that now there is a lot of support in the media fraternity for the women's team. I would have loved if this was the case before 2017, before they suddenly became, those heroes who almost won a World Cup for India. But I'm not complaining about it right now because there has been a lot of good work done in the media supporting women's cricket. It's not enough in terms of, especially if you look at print media, the newspaper coverage that it gets, the space that it gets. In the online world, there is a little more leeway in terms of space. So there are more content pieces. But again, it's not enough and it needs to grow. But compared to where it was 5 years ago, it's in a much healthier space.
Right. And talking about healthier spaces, one change that I'm seeing more as an audience is the commentary box. Right? I think from the point of women anchors in IPL for a completely different reason, to now looking at people like you and Anjum coming in and as an expert, even in the men's game sometimes, with Isa coming in and others talking about it. The battle, or rather the glass ceilings in broadcasting, seem to be easier to break through than the player glass ceilings. Is that a fair assessment?
How do you mean player glass ceilings?
I meant, like, we were talking about how an IPL is taking us so long to sort of reinvent, but we seem to be making some movement, at least as far as women's representation from the commentary box perspective. Would you agree with that line of thought?
Yeah, because in general, I would say that some of the people in charge of broadcasting are a little more proactive, little more forward-minded and progressive than maybe some of the people in charge of running the game. And therefore, we see more and more of these decisions being taken where, you're not judged on calling a game based on whether you're a man or a woman. Both can equally have the opportunity to call games. And I wish there were more and more women. And I'm sure after this current batch of women cricketers retire, we're going to see a number of them move into very high profile media roles. And I would love to see more and more of that, because the power of that is huge in terms of another perspective that it brings, in terms of how it tells people that this is something that you can do. It tells young girls that it's completely normal for a woman to be commenting on a men's match, and similarly for a man to be commenting on a women's match. So in terms of how that is slowly changing the world, it is changing. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it really evolves with this batch of Indian cricketers after they finish their playing careers.
Right. Same here. In fact, there's one question that has always been in my mind. We were talking about women calling men's games, etc. But if you look at the world of umpiring per se, right, and living at a time where it's very common to see a women's referee in a Premier League match. Not very common, but it is possible to see a women's referee in a Premier League match. I At any point, is there anything regulatory that stops women from the world of umpiring?
No, it's one of the best places in terms of opportunities for anyone
Right.
involved in cricket to really make a good living in the game. There are right now 3 women amongst the BCCI panel of umpires. 2 of those women have been selected in the ICC development panel. So there is a very clear push from the ICC also to sort of give a lot of international exposure and opportunities to this development panel of women all around the world, to therefore get them ready to be the next generation of umpires who will be umpiring international matches. And it's good to see that. It is also a field where you require a lot of groundwork before you can move your way up the levels, and that isn't going to happen just because you're a woman. So it is a field that demands that level of patience also. But in terms of the opportunity, one of my favorite stories is Janani Narayan from Chennai, who is an umpire in the BCCI, and she's giving decisions on BCCI men's, boys matches, women's matches. I don't think she's done Ranji yet, but she's overseeing some real hardcore cricketers and confidently holding her own in that environment, despite not having played a single day of cricket in her life. She's not a former player who's become an umpire. She's a software engineer who loved the game and decided to take up umpiring by the side, was told twice by her state association that umpiring is not for women, came back a third time, and she cracked it. And now she's an umpire with the ICC development panels. And it's one of my favorite stories in sport.
Janani's is indeed a beautiful story, isn't it? At this point, Snehal, I wanted to speak to you about brand Snehal. I think with your articles and your YouTube channel, which is called Cricket with Snehal, I think you built your brand online very, very well. My most favorite piece of video in your YouTube channel is the one with Mahesh Ransube, the guy who has repaired bats of Virat, MS, Ben Stokes, among others. I loved your interview with him. You also create a lot of DIY videos where you talk about really small aspects of the game, right from how to buy the right ball from a shop or how to play different shots. I'm assuming this is also coming from a place where growing up, you didn't really have all of these tips handy, and you are trying to make this better for the kids who are learning today. How is this going? And what has been the response of children and young people who are learning the game from this channel? I have to say, this is not a small channel by any means. Many of your videos have clocked more than 500,000 views.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the YouTube aspect of my career and my journey has been one of the most interesting because it was so unexpected and almost an accident that I decided to try, sharing my knowledge on YouTube. But that was always one thing very clear in my mind, that I could do things that other people may not necessarily be able to do. Other former players, like being able to communicate effectively through my media work, through my writing, was one of the reasons why I knew it set me apart. And that's why I didn't, like, for example, take up coaching straight away after playing, because anyone could do that, but I wanted to make a difference where I knew I had the skills to do so. At the same time, this teaching people about my experience is a very rewarding part, and just sharing my journey, that was the intention of YouTube. It wasn't to be a teaching channel. It was just meant to be a vlogging channel where I talk about cricket. But suddenly the teaching videos started to do well. And then I did more and more of them. And then I switched the language from English to Hindi. And the Hindi videos did even better. And I stopped doing English altogether and concentrated only on Hindi. I taught myself editing. I taught myself all the skills needed to shoot a video on my own, because until a couple of years ago, I was literally running the channel completely on my own, shooting, editing all the videos myself, which I had to teach myself a lot of other things because I had never learned all these things. But it opened up a very interesting world. It opened up a world where I can coach not 50, but 50,000. And that has now progressed to the way where I'm creating more and more structured courses for kids who want to learn deeper, to consume. Because I see a lot of these kids, what they're saying is, we want to learn cricket, but we don't have a coach nearby. We don't have an academy nearby, or we don't have the means to travel, or we don't have the money to afford these expensive coaching materials, etc. So I've created a course which is something that can be consumed anywhere. So any kid can have access to my experience and my knowledge through these courses. And irrespective of your geography, irrespective of whether you stay wherever. And now I have a few students in that program from places like Mahendragarh, or places like there are literally places whose names I can't remember because I've never heard of these places. Bijnor in Uttar Pradesh, Shirur outside Pune. And these are the kind of places which my students are coming from, because there is a gap between good coaching and where they are staying, and they want access, and the internet is enabling that. So I'm trying to create these programs which will fill in those gaps. And that's one of the hopes and one of the visions with the channel, is to be able to provide that kind of experience and that kind of good quality access to a mentor or a coach. Again, something that I didn't have good access to these kids, so that they can overcome whatever those initial steps are in getting good direction for how their career should be going. The parents are asking very basic questions like, what is the right age to start doing this? What should she be eating? What should she be drinking? How many matches should he play a week? Those kind of questions that we can talk about in our community and get answered. So that is one lovely little medium that I have. It's a very different audience to the audience I have for my writing, but it's an audience and a market that definitely exists, is what I've seen and learned.
I think the iconography of it, the fact that they are learning from a woman, also must be making a huge difference to the girls watching these videos, isn't it? You also spend a lot of time with children from middle India. You mentioned some remote towns yourself earlier. And I also know that you spent a lot of time coaching with academies in distant districts like Anantapur, for example. What are you seeing there? Because I'm assuming the next Snehal, the next Julan will come from these towns, as we are seeing in the men's game itself. And how do you feel about the future of women's cricket in India?
Whenever I look at the talent available in the system, whenever I look at some of these girls, like I mentioned, Shirur. I have one of my students who is like phenomenally talented batter at just 8-9 years old, and the form that she has, the movement patterns are all already there. So when I look at that, there is no way I can be pessimistic about the talent supply. Two things are really a question here. The opportunity to play matches is something that a lot of people in the media have highlighted. Sharda Ugra goes on and on about this is the one thing lacking in Indian sport, not just women's cricket, all over, that the opportunity to play a lot of matches, and two, the access to good quality coaching. Because the 1 week that I spent with those girls in Anandpur, it was something that they had never kind of experienced before, a way of thinking that they had never experienced before. And if they had access to something like that on a regular basis, they had access to coaches who were trained to coach in a specific way to get the best results. Who knows? Forget Indian women's cricket, even men's cricket, the coaching needs so much. It really depends on whether you find that good coach, that good guide. If you look at any successful athlete, they always have that one person who has shaped their journey early on, and in some cases remains their coach their entire life. So those are the two things, the opportunities. So in terms of more tournaments need to be created, and in terms of good quality coaching needs to be there to basically put these athletes in a position to make the most of these opportunities. So if those gaps can be filled, and some part of the work we're doing at the Equal You project, which is the continuing effort after the report was published, to see how we can help, to see how we can facilitate the filling of those gaps, to see whether we can provide solutions on our level. Those gaps, if they are filled, literally other countries' support staff and experts and commentators say we are scared of what will happen if India gets it right. Because if we get it right, we will dominate cricket for 10 years straight. We will win every World Cup. That's how I see it.
I can't wait for that to happen. Snehal, I've taken a lot of your time. Thank you so much. And before we end, what do you plan to do with this unexpected window of time that you have? Are you watching anything interesting? Are you listening to anything interesting or reading?
I'm currently reading Michelle Obama's Autobiography, which is a pretty interesting read.
It is.
And I'm catching up on my Star Trek. I'm a fan of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine series. So those are the two things that are that I'm using my free time on when I'm not trying to be outdoors as much as possible, as much as these lockdowns allow. But I think the next few months, I'm really probably going to double down on my YouTube programs and see how they can reach as many people as possible. Because that's something the pandemic also taught me, is that you can't depend on these external sources of income or opportunity. You have to create your own. And that is something that is very much my own baby and my own creation. And I think it's a very high potential program in terms of how it can reach a lot of people. And that is something that I'll be focusing on.
Wonderful. Snehal, thank you so much for your time, and good luck with all the inspiration work you're doing, especially with Equal You. And look forward to seeing you in the commentary box very soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik, that's Karthik with an H, on Twitter, and Filter _Koffee, that's coffee with a K, on Instagram.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week: Cred, Siet, thewholetruthfoods.com, and PayPal. We really do appreciate the support. On Cyrus Says, we discussed quite a bit about the local assembly elections this month. Vasanti Hariprakash was there to talk about the West Bengal elections, and then we also spoke to Pradeep Gupta, a psephologist and author. He's the chairman and MD of Access My India. Do definitely check that episode out. Great conversation. Tune into This Round Is On Me, where Gauri Devi Dayal caught up on the latest trends in the PR industry with Archana Jain from PR Pundit. On The Habit Coach, Ashton Doctor spoke to Anandita Chatterjee. She's the founder of Travel Chatter. She's been a marketer with some large firms and has traveled to 67 countries so far. It was a RuPaul Drag Race fan club on KBCD where Farhad and Sunetro discussed the show's best moments and talents. Amber Rana was joined by celebrity fitness trainer Shivoham on New Year Kanun to discuss fitness laws and regulations in India. They talk about the laws and infrastructure that exist to protect gyms, trainers, and also consumers in the fitness industry. And on the note with Maruk Inayat, we have clinical psychologist and friend of the network, Sonali Gupta. She talks about ongoing mental health issues like survivor's guilt, coping with anxiety around the pandemic, and doom scrolling. And with that, we hope to see you again next week.
2020 is a difficult year. A global pandemic, protests, elections, recessions. You get the picture. What we need is a space where we can have nuanced discussions about global affairs and foreign policy. That's where I come in. My name is Hamsini Hariharan, and I host the States of Anarchy podcast. Every second Tuesday, I speak to experts in the field of international relations to make a little more sense of the world. So join me on the IVM podcast app, website, or wherever you're listening to me right now.